Thank you. Thank you, Reyes, for your kind words. At least I think they were kind words, because I don't speak Spanish. The translation didn't work. Technology lies behind the success in almost any presentation. So I'm very honoured to be here today. Thank you very much for the invitation. I've been asked to focus my remarks on how universities around the world can engage to build their reputations. So to talk a little bit more in practical terms about what universities can do to try and build the reputations that they want. But before I do, I'd like to ask a question, which is to push back with this idea of how much do we really know about reputation. This is an extremely overused word, and reputation has, from our perspective, a very specific set of criteria which distinguish it from a number of similar concepts, which it may seem like semantics, but it's very important. If you're going to think about the reputation that you want, you need to understand what it is we're talking about, as distinct from a number of other concepts. The positioning paper, which came out with the conference papers, sets out some of the landscape around that series of questions, and included some very important fundamentals. So I'd like to just quickly start, if I may, by highlighting 4 themes that I felt were really interesting out of that research paper and that positioning paper. The first is this idea that reputation confers value. Okay. Now, we think we know that's the case, but I challenge the extent to which we're very definitive about the process by which reputation does actually confer that. So if you think about businesses talk about the fact that reputation confers value in attracting the right talent, in building a supply chain that's going to then deliver value. With investors, having a reputation for certain things with investors delivers you a better share price. With regulators, particularly interesting point, regulators have a limited set of resources. Where do they seek to regulate? Where they believe there are problems. So if you have a better reputation, you arguably achieve a regulatory dividend. Less regulation, less cost, less interference. And customers. There was a very nice study done around the US wine industry, which looked at the reputation of certain vineyards, and they were able to charge between 38 and 62% more for their wines, which arguably were no better than similar wines in neighbouring vineyards, but they leveraged the power of their reputations. So we think we know that reputation confers advantage, and it's especially true in the university sector, where you're competing nationally and internationally in a time of extreme resource scarcity. In critical areas, I would argue that reputation plays a role or a part in university life, is in the question of funding. Where does your funding come from? And the reputations of universities is going to be a huge determinant around funding. The quality of scholarship you'll be able to attract to come and work within the organisations, world-class universities that we have, and also getting the right student pool. These are all matters where reputation plays a significant role. So the author's first point about reputation conferring value, I agree, it does, but I think a bit more work needs to be done about the process by which that reputation advantage acts. Secondly, we've seen a proliferation of rankings. Rankings have now become, they've multiplied, mainly because the technology has been able to unlock traditionally rather arcane data sets, but also the multiple and more availability of data sets. So the rankings are becoming more visible and they're multiplying. And they are increasingly becoming shortcuts, they're proxies for a series of quality assessments about universities. And I'm going to come back to why that's problematic. But the fact it's happening, I think is undeniable. The third point, which again came out of the paper, I thought was again another really important and critical observation, is that universities, like companies and individuals, have multiple different reputations for something or with someone. And the authors brought that out very nicely. We have done a lot of work at Oxford. We're known for that particular aspect of reputation scholarship, which is around this idea of multiplicity of reputations. So as individuals and as companies or institutions, we have a series of different reputations, some of which we like, some of which we may not like, but we happily exist with multiple different frames of reference, depending on the audience who's looking at it. Okay. And so this idea is a critical dimension that underpins any real understanding of reputation. The paper sets out 6 topics, because if you think about reputation for something, or with someone, who are we talking about? Who is the with that we're talking about? Well, the paper sets out 6, which is students, past and present. I would add future students, attracting the next generation of leaders, cultural, business, and others. Academics, another critical component, critical part. Management, some of you here in the room. Public bodies and funders. Employer groups, the people who are actually going to reward the investment that students have given into their education with a role, with a job. Employer groups, and then the general public. So each of those are the different publics, and if you think about the different reputations that they would think about, they're going to think about different attributes, depending on their perspective and where they sit in that public's group. So public bodies, for example, may well think about research excellence and governance. Those 2 aspects we see as regularly the most important aspects of reputation when it comes to public bodies and funding. With students, we're going to see something different. We're going to see probably status. If you have been to a high-status university, it's some signal of quality. And that's about your employability, the quality of teaching environment, and probably also things like whether the student accommodation and the food is good, or whether the nightlife is good. In the UK, right now, Leeds University has a fantastic reputation. Not particularly for its academic qualities, although one is not saying it's bad, but it has a stellar reputation for being a great place to go out between 10 at night and 2 in the morning. The fourth, and again very nice concept that came out of the paper that I picked up on, is this idea of reputation differentiators within each part of different institutions. This is a very important point, because you see this with multiple different universities and different institutions. Within my own institution, the University of Oxford, different colleges have a different set of reputations. Oriel is seen to be a rowing college. Christ Church is seen to be a wealthy college. St Anthony's is seen to be a sort of quirky college. So different reputations within just a college system within Oxford. Okay? If you think about it within some of the very, very big and successful global universities, Harvard has a fantastic reputation, but it has a great reputation for different things within the business school than it does within the university, and they're 2 separate governance institutions, as you know. But also, there's going to be differentiators within the faculty and the differentiation within a part of the school. In our business school at Oxford, we have centres of excellence. We have one which is the Centre for Business Taxation, which is probably one of the world's leading taxation scholarship exercises and centres. And we also have, of course, our own Centre for Corporate Reputation, which is now one of the world's, or arguably I would of course say, the world's leading centre looking at, from an academic perspective, looking at the research on how organisations can create sustain, destroy, and then rebuild their reputations. So, 4 particularly important concepts in that position of paper. But what intrigues me from reading that paper are a number of key questions that emerge from those fundamental points. And there were really 3 I wanted to highlight. The first is how it's possible to think about aggregating and creating different rankings when you're dealing with multiple different reputations. So this idea of a ranking of top to bottom, the Times, Higher Education, the Financial Times group when it comes to business, these are rankings which naturally aggregate different attributes, weight them with a different weighting, and then come up to a particular ranking. So that as someone involved in scholarship around reputation, that has so many big questions attached to it. How do you think about which reputations to weight? Which reputation should be weighted in different ways? Does that matter or change in different parts of the world, culturally, or not? So there's very many subjective aspects to those ranking creations, which creates interesting questions and dynamics about whether rankings actually tell us anything important about universities and the institutions who they purport to rank. The same, by the way, applies for rankings within corporations. So if you think about the Fortune Most Admired Companies rankings, when it comes to organisations, they aggregate positive and negative reputations and weight them equally. So if there are 2 good reputations and 2 bad reputations, they add them together and you come up with a net neutral score, which of course doesn't really tell you anything about the university or the institution that you're seeking to evaluate. I thought it was particularly interesting that the Fortune Most Admired Company in 2004 was Enron, one of the biggest corporate failures of 2005. So the second interesting and intriguing question we think that comes out of this paper is how do you separate out the status effect when it comes to rankings and reputation? Because if you take a look at the Times Higher Education rankings, the top 10, in fact the top 11, have been absolutely consistent for the last 5 years and probably not. They're all US and UK institutions. And they broadly slip around the same rankings. Now, how much of that is a status effect? How much of that is actually due to a historic perception that they are leading universities? And how much is actually down to specific reputational aspects of what they do? That's a big question. It's a big unanswered research question, and we're spending quite a bit of time looking at that. And it's not just universities that have that problem, because you've got to think about status effects across multiple different organisations. So think about royal families. Think about the monarchies of Europe. How much of their reputations are built on this element of high status? And how much is built on reputational qualities in terms of what they're known for with whom? If you think about banks, HSBC would be a very, very good recent example. We traded extremely successfully throughout the financial crisis, and people regarded it as one of these high reputation quality banks. And it emerged that ultimately a lot was happening under the surface of HSBC, but it was hidden, arguably perhaps by a high status effect. This ability to extract value from your high status, which then hides your reputational problems, is a particularly interesting question. And we're interested about whether just simply the fact that universities have been around for a long time might be a part of that. Maybe Oxford doesn't deserve its top 5 position. Maybe it's just because it's the University of Oxford. I'm not sure that's true. And it's certainly not true if you look at some of the oldest universities in the world. Salamanca, Bologna. These are institutions that rank below 75 now in any of the world rankings. The third question that emerges out of the research is just asking this question of just how successful and helpful rankings can be. For any user, this point about aggregation troubles me. How can I tell if a university is going to be a great place to go out at 10 o'clock at night if I'm a student and have a great nightlife, when actually the aggregated score weights against that? How can I give any real, tangible sense to the reputations that matter if everything is brought up into one aggregate score? I think that's problematic. And for the people who are being evaluated, of course, it's a very hard noose to escape from. One thing you know about rankings is that the person who wins thinks that that year's methodology is fantastic. The people who come second to 1,000 think there's a problem. Okay? The point is that for a user, it's going to be problematic in lots of ways, unless you're a winner. And it also sets expectation frames. We at Oxford, we worry about moving from 4th to 5th. It becomes a major problem for us. And we start to worry about what we're doing. Now that would be what I would call a high quality or a high class problem. So, that's just some quick observations, if I may, about the paper. I'm going to concentrate, as I said, on something more practical. With that background, what is it that universities, in our view, can do to engage with reputation? And I'm going to focus my remarks around what I'm going to call a 3-2-1 model. And I'll explain what that 3-2-1 model is. But before I start, I'd like to quickly just define reputation. The authors of the paper used Gary Allen Fine and talked about sociological definitions around reputation. I think it's important to note that there are other disciplines who also look at reputation and define it in different ways. Economists, whereas we would define reputation perhaps differently to the way Gary Allen Fine would define reputation. And likewise, psychologists, institutional theorists, and others have their own definitions. The closest that we think we have got to for a universal definition of reputation, one that all the different disciplines broadly agree with, is this: and that reputation consists of expectations about an organisation or an institution or an individual's future behaviour or performance based on perceptions of past behaviour or performance. So this idea that reputation is about what you expect of someone in the future based on what you perceive them to have done in the past. It may not be based on the fact of what they've done, but based on perceptions of what they've done. That's the closest we've got to a definition that we think everyone broadly agrees. And this helps to distinguish reputation from some of the other concepts that we feel have been used interchangeably in the paper too, the positioning paper, wrongly in our view, by the authors, from a number of other concepts. Image, for example, is used. Image is different from reputation. Image is a snapshot in a moment of time, which can then be repeated again and again and again and again. So this idea of image is different from reputation, which is more dynamic, and it's got a time factor. Status is a ranking measure. You're high or you're low. Brand, another word to be confused and used interchangeably, we would argue is an input into the process of reputation formation. Your brand is what you want to be, but reputation is what others see you as. So your brand is something which you express out, which may not be bought by your audience in the way that you want it to be. So there are some critical differences in the definition, and I think for this conference, identifying the differences between brand, image, status, and reputation are critical to getting something when you're thinking about what it is you're doing. So, what is the 3-2-1 model? Well, I'm going to try it out and see if you like it. Okay, the 3-2-1 model that I think of reputation engagement. Now, I'm using this term too because the authors talk about reputation manage it. Now, I have a huge problem with that. Because if reputation is something which is a set of expectations or views held by others on you, I don't think you own your reputation. And if you don't own your reputation, then you can't manage it. You can engage with it, you can influence it, but ultimately you don't own it. And I think that's a really critical point as well, because institutions, including universities, tend to work on command and control basis. You have a demand that there's a finance outcome by Friday, or a marketing outcome by next Thursday, or a product launch, or whatever it's going to be, a new student term, etc. But reputation is not something where you say to someone, I want you to deliver me a good reputation by Tuesday. It just doesn't happen like that. Okay? My reputation here today is owned by you. You can go away and say, that was a complete waste of half an hour. Or you could go away and say, that's given me some food for thought. I can influence it by doing certain things, but I can't control it. So this idea of reputation engagement, not reputation management, is what I'm going to talk about. So what is the 3-2-1 model of reputation engagement? The 3, the first part of it, refers to what you can control as an organisation in terms of a reputation engagement strategy. There are 3 aspects that we believe are within your power and which significantly influence your reputation. The first is your behaviour. Okay? It's not going to be rocket science, what I'm going to talk about here, but your behaviour is important because it sends signals. Okay? So anyone thinking that through carefully is going to think, well, the signal's important set against expectation frames. Okay? If I am the Italian mafia, okay, and I decide that I'm going to treat everyone extremely well, give them pension funds, this is against a set of expectations that's completely and totally the reverse of what's expected. So that makes a reputation statement beyond what that would do for a reputable organisation, a university or a company, which is going through the normal process of giving pensions to their staff. Okay? So reputation signals are important when set against expectation frames. Okay? Think of this. In the UK, what was the signal being sent by the British elite universities, the Russell Group of universities, when the government allowed universities for the first time to charge £9,000 for fees, as opposed to £3,000 for fees? All the Russell Group universities immediately moved to £9,000. Now, what signal did that send? That sent a very clear signal that these were elite universities, and that if you wanted the best, this was the cost of provision of education. If they decided to do something less, it would have been a very confusing signal, because the elite universities, arguably, are the most expensive to teach. So, definitive signalling happening against a set of expectation frames. The second thing you control is this idea of the networks that you choose to engage with. So your first is behavior, your second is networks. Now networks, reputation is created through and flows around a network. And not all networks are similar. If I put it this way, you have open and closed networks, 2 different sides of the equation. If you think of a closed network would be where everyone knows everyone. So a classic closed network would be a family group. In a family group, does information move fast or slow? Okay? I'm not going to ask you about your families, but my guess is that in most family groups, information moves fast. And does information move with great certainty or less certainty? Probably with great certainty in a family. So in a closed network, information moves fast and with great certainty. What are the implications of that when it comes to engaging with reputation control, damage control, or crisis? It means you have no time. You have no time to act. And in an open network, the opposite is true. You have lots of time. Information moves less quickly. You can pick up individuals, work with them on a particular point, hope that then they see it the way you see it, and get them to be a participant in the way you see the world. Okay? So, you can engage in your networks depending on the quality and the type of network they've got. And each of the organizations or individuals or universities are going to have multiple different networks that they interact with. Within academia, within the research community that I'm involved in, we have a series of open networks within disciplines. So this idea that I'm in the business faculty and I'm an economist, I will have a group of people that I interact with reasonably regularly, but not every day. Information moves slowly. When I've got something to say, I will then engage with someone, talk about my research, talk about what we're doing, etc. But it's going to be a slow, iterative process, an open network. And that's where innovation is fostered. That's when you get great new ideas. Because you've got time. People go, let me think about that. They don't have to instantly judge something. Innovation doesn't get stifled in an open network. If you think about the closed networks, there are some closed networks that within the academic world we all have, which is it's very rare. Once you've got your partners who you collaborate with and write with, it's very rare to break that apart. People tend to write with the same cohorts throughout networks. That is a closed network, which is very difficult to break. So, the second big point, think about the networks. Are they open or are they closed? And do things differently depending on what dynamic you have. The third aspect of reputation engagement is this idea of narratives. I agree with the position paper authors when they say that communications is extremely important. How organizations talk about themselves is very important. If you think of the way that Reyes introduced me today, again, I didn't really catch most of what she said, but had she said, I'm delighted that Rupert is here today to talk about reputation because the real expert on reputation unfortunately was not able to be here, and so Rupert has come in to stand in for the real expert. Before I have even opened my mouth, I'm seen in a certain way. So narratives and the use of narratives is extremely important. And organizations and individuals are very strategic about the way in which we use narrative. So yes, very important. And a question that we find particularly interesting at the University in Oxford is this idea of culturally sensitive narratives. One example would be apology cultures. Why is it that in certain Eastern economies, Eastern cultures, apologizing is seen as an absolutely essential starting point to any form of crisis recovery? And yet in the States, it's part of a legal strategy, and normally forbidden. Don't apologize for anything, otherwise you'll get a lawsuit. So if you're a global company operating in Japan and in the US, how do you reconcile this idea of culturally sensitive narratives? It's a really interesting question, and one that I spend a bit of time trying to unlock. So, that's the first stage of the model, the three. Those three aspects, which is what you can control or engage with. And that is first of all your behavior, secondly the networks, and third your narratives. Now, that of course is about what you can do. But reputation, as we've talked about, is what others think of you. So what's the mechanism by which what you do gets translated into a reputation? Well, we think there's some quite interesting things. First of all, this is the two, because we have the three, the two. There are two aspects that we think probably are quite helpful to think about when it comes to the different types of reputations that you want. And they're these. First of all, you have a capability reputation. What is it that you're able to actually do? Deliver an educational promise. Drill for oil. value gems, whatever it's going to be. Okay? That is a capability reputation. And then the second bucket is your character. Your character reputation, which is what is it that you're likely to do in any circumstance? What is the behavioural trait of the institution or the organisation? And if you separate the different types of reputation that you have into those two boxes, it's a really interesting exercise to do. A lot of the competence reputations, once you've earned that right to be an educational institution or an oil company or whatever it's going to be, it's extremely hard to lose your competence reputation. Once you've got that ability, you've got to do something really, really bad to destroy it. But your character reputation, that's the reputation which is extremely volatile. And you're on the stage or in the job on a daily basis. I'll give you an example. The art market, the global art market. Sotheby's and Christie's, two major art institutions. Those of you who may remember that in 2000, Sotheby's and Christie's were accused and convicted of price fixing. Okay? Ripping off their customers by charging more than they should have done, colluding on prices. Both of their chairmen were in the dock. Taubman, who's the Sotheby's chairman, went to jail. Tennant, who was the Christie's chairman, never went to jail, but never went back to the US. Otherwise, he would have been put back into jail, or he would have been put into jail and arrested as soon as he landed. Okay? What happened? Bearing in mind, this is two big companies. How did customers react? How did the art buyers react? Virtually no reaction. Interesting. You rip off your customers, price fix, and they carry on buying. A particularly interesting dynamic. Compare and contrast that with in 1997, Sotheby's was found to be selling fake antiquities. Okay? It was taking antiquities from Mesopotamia, and it was selling them as real, when in fact they were fakes. Their antiquities department lost customers in droves. Basically, their London office collapsed, and it was 14 years before they came back. The answer for that is the capability, that sort of competence, capability reputation, the one thing that people expect from an art is to be able to tell what's fake from what's not. That is a core competence, and when they were found wanting in that destroyed both. The rest of it, how they behaved on their pricing, was damaging in terms of sentiment. Fundamentally, you can get it. So, interesting to separate out those two different aspects of reputation. Character, or volatile, you can get over it. And competence. Once you get hit there, it's a very big problem. What character reputations matter most to universities? Well, I'd offer an observation. Surely two of the worst character attributes for universities in today's world, certainly within academics and within funding bodies, would be timidity, this idea that you're not brave enough to express the ideas that you believe are worth expressing, or, even worse perhaps, having a reputation for irrelevance, studying things that simply don't matter. Two of the worst type of reputations that I think we probably identify within universities. Within the students' area, probably governance is a big area for that. For example, the Penn State response to the Sandusky scandal. That was a very important signal of the way in which the university management teams in the US, or in Penn State in particular, felt their duty of care to be when it came to looking after their student body. A very important aspect for new students coming. So, Finally, and I'll finish off, so I keep my reputation for timeliness, because I believe it's for half past 4 over the delay, is the one, that final one. The 3, 2, and the 1. The 1 is this idea of authenticity. It's a particularly interesting concept. Being inauthentic has major reputational consequences. So when your narrative moves ahead of your behaviours, or your behaviours don't match your narrative, you have a major problem. The biggest recipients of the Inauthenticity Awards, I would argue, have been the banks in the last 5 years. They've talked about what they're trying to do to be better citizens, and in fact, their narrative has moved ahead of a number of very important dynamic moves that they've made. There's a section after this which is devoted to corporate social responsibility. And I just want to offer a final comment to say that this is where an area where inauthenticity, authentic claims, can be very damaging and ultimately a waste of a very valuable reputation. Done well, I would offer this one piece of advice, done well when the social action, that is, or the corporate social responsibility strategy, if it is fundamentally about your business, in other words, it seems to be authentic because it matters to the ongoing life of your business, terrific. It's going to be additive and it'll work. If it's something which is a bolt-on, giving some money to a charity, philanthropic stuff related to the chairman's wife, whatever it's going to be, it's inauthentic. It's not going to survive damage, and it ultimately is damaging to your reputation. So, with that note, I'm going to close and say thank you very much, and good luck with the rest of your meetings.